Good evening. This is John Bailey, and this is People to Be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. And tonight you've got Gary Percesepe,
Hi, John.
The pastor of the United Church of Christ in the Church in the Highlands in White Plains, New York, USA.
35 Bryan Avenue.
That's right.
White Plains.
Right. And service is at the usual times, right?
Usual time, 10 a.m.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And the reason you are here is because someone suggested to me that you had a forum recently, and a series of forums that were addressing community issues. But let's go back into your personal path to the ministry. First of all, you are from Yonkers, as I
From
understand.
Yonkers originally, South Yonkers.
Right. And how did you choose your calling?
Well, you know, I kind of feel like God chose me.
He always does.
That's, you know, after some resistance on my part. But I always felt a call to ministry, but I was very interested in teaching and education. I remain interested. I taught for many years philosophy, and I still teach part-time at Fordham University in their Department of Philosophy. I teach a couple of classes, so it gives me a good opportunity to work with young people, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, philosophy is a really overlooked course today, because I took one course in it, but it has affected me all my life.
Yeah,
you know,
and at Fordham, all the students, regardless of their major, are required to take 2 courses in philosophy. Philosophy of human nature and ethics, so it's a good grounding. But, you know, I taught for a number of years. I was director of an honors program. I headed up did a lot of administrative things, but I always felt that tug, you know, that call to work in the wider community with people of all ages, not just young people. And so eventually I left teaching as a full-time profession and began to serve in churches. So I've been at it for about 20 years now. So.
Right. And was there any particular incident that turned you to the profession that is most needed, often overlooked, and not paid attention to?
Well, I was doing some community organizing. I think the issue was poverty. I was living at that time and serving in Ohio, you know, in a typical industrial area, kind of run down. Jobs had flooded the community. Education, you know, public schools were failing, and we were trying to strengthen those public schools. But in very poor neighborhoods, what happens is that it's not that many poor people move in. It's just that everybody who could afford to leave already got out, leaving behind, you know, the poorest of the poor. Schools were failing, and so I think that was the issue. I began to say, you know, what can I do? You know, what is my calling in this neighborhood? So we started a number of nonprofit organizations, but the church was still in the neighborhood. It had never left. And I think that the people in those neighborhoods really appreciated that.
I see. So was there any particular incident that really turned you into a minister?
I think it wasn't any one particular thing. I think it was just the accumulation of who I was, the feeling of who I am, what my calling is to ministry, how I can best serve the community, and finally I just stopped resisting and gave in and let go and let God do it.
Right. It's always easier when you just take things that God sends your way as challenges and deals with it. I've had that experience myself. What brought you into the Church in the Highlands to achieve?
Well, I came about 2 years ago, John, and we have a placement system in the United Church of Christ. It's kind of like a dating service or a marriage service, really, where those pastors who are looking for a new call and churches who are looking for a new minister can kind of find each other, read profiles, and after that, it's the Holy Spirit. You know, we get to meet each other, we learn about each other. There's some interviews, some Skype interviews or face-to-face interviews, and eventually, you know, I wanted to come back to Westchester. I'm born and raised here, and I wanted to come back. So it seemed like a good fit, and I've always liked White Plains. So.
Right. Now, this is not what you would call a community with extensive poverty.
Right, it's a very different community.
It is. Well,
right.
but it's very symptomatic of
Mhm.
representative of the country. You
Right.
have a very
Right.
well-off population, which lives in the donut, as they say,
Mhm.
and
Right.
another population
Right.
that is living in the downtown.
Side by side,
That's
and
right.
and that's true, and it was different. I had served a couple of suburban congregations that more closely resemble this one, but what really was fascinating to me about church in the Highlands was that it had a real neighborhood. The church sits in the Highlands neighborhood, and for many years has been kind of an anchor, and really sees itself as trying to serve the community and serve the neighborhood.
Now, what is your mission here? You have started a series of forums,
Yes.
the first of which was held recently
Right.
on immigration, something that nobody
Right.
really likes to talk about too much.
Well, what happened, John, was
Yeah.
that we were saying to ourselves, what is God calling us to do? How can we best serve the community? And it occurred to us that there really are not very many safe places where people can go, and even though they may disagree, in some cases disagree violently with each other, where they can be free to express their opinion, even their disagreement. And so we wanted to address hot button issues, and what could be more hot button at this time in 2016 than the issue of immigration. So we
Yeah.
put together a group of people. They made some opening statements. We had an immigration lawyer. We had some people who themselves, were immigrants, and we just tried to have an open and honest conversation, and that's what happened. It was great, great, great experience.
What did you learn from that? What came out of it?
Well, the first thing we learned is that we can do this. We can have a civil conversation, even though people hold wildly divergent points of view. We can still respect one another. And the idea that we had, it actually came from a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "Speak your truth, but not to punish." So in other words,
What a nice statement.
yeah, we're gonna tell the truth as we see it, but our goal is not to punish somebody who has a different belief.
Right.
Our goal is instead to try to learn why they hold that belief and to share where we stand. So I really do like that idea. Speak the truth, but not to punish.
Yes, and that is particularly something that is needed today with this presidential campaign from beyond.
It's been an interesting several months. I was just reading
To say
today
the least.
about
An understatement of
middle school, and high school
yes,
teachers
right.
teaching civics. I mean, never before have they, had the kind of challenges that they
teachable
have.
moment.
It's a very teachable
Yes.
moment, and I think it's also producing a lot of anxiety out there,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of where people stand on issues or whether they're Democrat or Independent or Republican. Everybody's anxiety seems to just be going through the roof right now.
I know mine is. I never watch television anymore. I
Yeah.
loathed watching the last debate.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, wait, only 3 weeks to the election. We're taping 3 weeks before the election.
Yeah,
And
it seems like it's never going to end. Yeah.
well, it just gets worse.
Yeah.
It just
Well,
gets worse.
and what I've been saying, about this is, first of all, for leaders, for those who, serve in positions in churches, when people come to worship, they don't want to be made more anxious. They want to have a non-anxious presence. Is there a word from God about our situation? What is the Spirit saying to us? And so we try as best we can to be non-anxious in our presentation, but also to speak the truth about what we see around us. Not endorsing candidates, it's never about that, but it's trying to hold up what we see as the timeless truth that can help people remain steadfast in times of stress and anxiety.
Well put. Now, on immigration specifically, what are some of the problems that the immigrant, or whether here legally or illegally, faces in our town? downtown White Plains?
Well, it's a constantly shifting landscape. I think one of the biggest issues that immigrants face to this community really is housing. It begins there. How do we find affordable housing? And one of the things I think that's a real challenge in our community is that many of the people who serve in this community, especially in the service industries, whether it's hotel and restaurant, beverage industries, work as domestics at hotels and so forth, and or clean our houses, or work in fast food restaurants. They cannot afford to live in the community where they serve. And that becomes a real, issue of justice and fairness.
Right.
So I think that's an issue. Education is definitely an issue.
Oh, the premier issue here.
It's a big issue, and they're not unrelated, because your ability to earn is tied to your education and your level of educational attainment.
Now, housing. There was at one time a lot of illegal housing in the city of White Plains. I believe it still exists. Now, these people are being exploited.
Right.
What is your feeling on that? How do we deal with that?
Well,
the city isn't going to deal with it.
It's,
They had 15 years to do it.
It's funny you mentioned that, because tonight the Shore Group, that has been working for many years, SHORE, wonderful acronym, but basically they've been working to provide safe housing and especially transitional housing. So not only the issue of homelessness, but the issue of those who have a home but they're looking for something more affordable, something that is not transient housing. So these are service organizations, not nonprofit organizations that are really looking to expand, the number of affordable housing units in Westchester.
But if you're a person that can't really afford to a $2,000 $3,000 a month apartment in White Plains, and your only alternative, other than living in New York City and a devastating expensive commute up here to do the work, is illegal housing, which is at risk for them. And do you feel that we just have to learn to live with the support of illegal housing by the city? They have to support it, otherwise they'd clean it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is complex, John, but I mean, from my point of view, I think what's needed is low and moderate income housing. There are communities around the country. There are places in Maryland, certainly Portland, Oregon has been one of the leaders in this area, where development is encouraged. Developers are welcome. But for all the development that they do, they must reserve 5% of their development, any new development,
10% in White Plains,
for affordable housing, low and moderate, middle income housing.
Yes, but the 10% that White Plains requires actually discourages development. But at least they did it.
Right.
Yes,
and right now, Westchester is being sued. I mean, it's paying a fine right now. I mean, in court, because they have, certain segments of Westchester have refused to adhere to the court order, and so the matter is an ongoing matter of litigation in the courts.
Well,
so it's a crisis.
Yes, all the what I like to call the white insulated communities of Westchester, that because of their zoning do not allow you to build townhouse type apartments.
And so the defense is home rule. The idea that the government can't tell us we're a home rule county and so forth. And as I said, the issue is complex, and we won't resolve it here. But I do think it is important from a justice and fairness issue. These are our neighbors. These are people who serve us in many capacities. I mean, don't they have the right to live in the community where they work? I mean, I think it's just a basic issue of fairness.
Yes. Now, in addition to fairness, the education issue. Yes. In White Plains, we have a 57% Latino population in the student body. 57%. That is by far the largest segment. And we are now trying to expand English language learner instruction. And they haven't decided how to do that yet. What do the immigrants themselves say about their educational issues? What do they say? Because they certainly don't come out to the school district to express it.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to put myself in you know, try to put words in anybody's mouth. I mean, the people can speak for themselves, but I think right now we're seeing a lot of fear you know, in the community. You know, this election is producing a lot of fear of deportation, fear, you know, just not knowing what November is going to bring and the future. But I think White Plains City Schools have done a tremendous job. You know, we have a kid in the schools. You know, our son Ashton, my wife and I. Ashton is, you know, was at the Post Road School, which is bilingual school, and you know, headed by a wonderful principal who is bilingual, and the assistant principal. I think the schools have really tried to step up and address the issue. The other thing I think that we should recognize is that this nation continues to be a melting pot. Now, I know in some quarters that's really
that
not
is true.
That, I mean, it's not. I mean, it's controversial to talk about, but the fact of the matter is, if immigrant populations haven't learned English, haven't really, quote, assimilated, you can be sure of one thing: their children will. You know, their children are going to speak English, their children are going to assimilate, because this is the great experiment in democracy. This is the great melting pot. People eventually do assimilate, they do learn the language, and the fact is, whether they learn the language or not, they're still contributing. They're still paying taxes, they're still making important contributions. And so I think coming out of the shadows is a very, very important thing.
Yeah, the White Plains problem is they get many English language learners coming in about the 4th, 5th, or 6th grade level, and so they hit the middle school very ill prepared. Because they're coming from. So this is somewhat of our problem.
Because education, John, as you know, it continues to be the best anti-poverty program ever invented. I mean, you know, because if you get an education, no one can ever take it away from you. It's yours.
That's right.
And you can, with that education, you can move up, and you can help your family to move up.
And
so education
you never
is
stop
critical.
learning.
You never stop learning. That's right.
Right. And now, so is there anything else? What are the forums coming up?
Well, we are working on planning some new ones. It would be a good thing if we could have one before the election. We're not sure that we're going to be able to pull that off or not. But some topics that have been suggested to us is ethics, especially public ethics.
Yes.
You know, look at the situation in Albany. Look at the current presidential situation.
Are there really public ethics?
So that's been suggested as a topic. Another topic that's been suggested is income inequality. You know, the 1%, the 99%. You know, we've been asked to explore that in a community forum. By the way, what we did was we hosted it here. It was on a Wednesday night. I think it was back in September, and we said at the time that we would like to try to do one of these once a month. So you know, stay tuned. You know, we hope to be able to do that on a Wednesday night, 7 p.m.
How many came out for it?
There were about 30 or 40 people who came out.
Good.
For a first time out of the box, it wasn't bad.
No, 40 is an excellent showing.
Yeah.
That's more than the Council of Neighborhood Associations gets, even when they have headliners.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and it was fun because, you know, we weren't putting folks forward as experts. You know, they were just sharing their expertise, and they began the discussion, and then all the members of the community kind of raised their hands, and they wanted their say, and it was a good exchange.
Right. Could we switch now to something? Over the weekend, there was an effort to draw attention to the suicide problem. We're heading into one of the worst times of the year for depression.
Right.
Now, how does a minister relate to that? I mean, it's tough calling up your pastor
Right.
and say, I'm really down or something, how do you encourage people to do that?
I'm
What do you do
especially
to tell them?
concerned with our veterans, our military veterans. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is a real thing. You talk about being a minister. I was once called by a dad of a young man. He was about 22 years old. And, he was having a bad day. There was a gun available. If the gun had not been available, perhaps he'd still be alive today. But he went, he found his gun, he shot himself in the presence of his children, 2 young children and his wife. The father called me. I mean, it was triage. I mean, it was just an emergency situation. It's the saddest thing. The funeral was the saddest thing I've ever experienced. Of course, what we try to do is to, before folks get to this time of crisis, to make ourselves available. And anyone listening to this, broadcast, I'd encourage anyone, to call me, to come by the church, to stop, or to reach out to a loved one. Our number here at the church, of course, area code 914-949-2023.
And I would go with saying that no matter what faith you belong to,
that's right.
Reach out.
That's right.
The reason.
That's
you,
right.
You go into the ministry to help people.
That's right. We're here to help,
better lives.
and we're not the only ones.
Yeah.
Many professionals around the country, and there are suicide hotlines, that you can call that are, and they're staffed around the clock for people. But I think, we were talking a moment ago about anxiety. What happens is that this anxiety begins to build until finally an individual, will decide that it's too great, it's too overwhelming. And so what I try to hope folks do is to break it down, into some, let's talk about now. Where are you now? Before it begins to be so overwhelming that you make a choice, that can never be changed, that is irrevocable. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. There is no problem so great that we cannot work in some way to make it better.
Yes, and in fact I saw a play by Terence Rattigan yesterday, a National Theatre production from London, The Deep Blue Sea, which explored this point of despair in its main character.
Right.
So that's why I asked this question, because I was really intrigued about how the play treated it.
Reach out, and there are people who love you and can help you. Reach out.
Yeah. Now, let's turn to the youth, the future. Today's young people becoming grounded in religion at a young age, as they were when I was a kid back in the 50s?
Things are different. I think that and this is not a value judgment, or good or bad. The fact of the matter is, it's a natural progression. That as folks become better educated, as more opportunities arise, the old ways, are seen as being no longer relevant to them.
How true.
I think I see this, I'm around 18-year-olds all the time, 17 and 18-year-olds. I teach college freshmen. It's not that there's not a hunger for spiritual things. There is. It's just that they don't perceive that the institutional church is necessarily the place to go with my spiritual hunger. That's just the way it is. And so what we're trying to do is to say, okay, talk to us about, where you are on your journey. Our motto here at the, at the church in the Highlands is, no matter who you are or where you are on your journey, you are welcome. You are welcome in this place.
So
hospitality.
True. That is so true.
It begins with hospitality. Everybody is welcome. One of my churches, we had an atheist who wanted to join the congregation. He was married to a woman who was a member of the congregation. He himself was an atheist, but he said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. You're working on poverty. You're working on justice and fairness issues. Can I join?" I said, "Sure. There's nothing preventing.
Wow.
You can come and join. Walk with us."
Absolutely. Now, is the church, when I was growing up, went to the youth fellowship on Sunday evenings
Right.
at the Presbyterian Church in Pleasantville. And that was pretty instrumental in forming my young years. And I was wondering if youth groups are still as active as they once were.
Some are. I mean, I think the challenge is, and certainly we have that challenge
Yeah.
here. You need a critical mass of young people, and young people look for other young people. So, there are places where youth ministry is thriving, but in many places, churches are struggling to provide, to have the resources to provide. But what I've been seeing is that, if you take just shift the way we think about young people. As I said, there's always going to be a spiritual hunger. Kids always want answers. They long for human connection. Why not go to where the young people already are? Where they are gathering. In other words, take the church to them rather than them having to come to the church. I'll give you an example. Some of my colleagues, on Ash Wednesday, we took some ashes and we went to the train station and we just stood there.
What a concept.
We were pastors, we were priests. It was like, do you want ashes? It's called Ashes to Go. Come to church for your ashes, we'll come to you. Young people are already gathering. They're at sporting events, they're at
That's
music,
what Jesus did.
Exactly.
That's
they're
right.
at festivals.
The first mobile ministry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jesus was a healer. He was an itinerant healer who went all around from all the towns and villages. So what I'm trying to say is that rather than folks having to come in the four walls of the building to meet God, God is already out there in the community. What church people need to get outside the walls and get going with what God is already doing in the community, in the lives of young people and elsewhere.
That's what I would really like to see more of from the clergy in this community.
Yeah, well, I think it's happening.
Coming out, going to meetings and letting the Common Council know why something is a bad idea or a good idea.
Well, the clergy, among others, took to the streets not long ago, when we had such an epidemic, of gun violence, and the clergy remain very concerned about gun violence in the nation,
That's
but
true,
also in our community.
That's not going to change, though, because of our Congress.
Well,
that's the problem.
Congress will have to change if enough of us get busy and get active.
Exactly. But, I mean, the problem is the U.S. government, which has no strength
to
do the right thing.
I think the feeling of powerlessness, that we're powerless to change things, that has to be the first thing to go. We're not powerless. It's not only that we have the vote, it's also that we can make choices ourselves, that affirm life. So responsible gun ownership is really important. But I think one of the things that Westchester United, which is a group of clergy and folks from churches and synagogues and mosques in the area, we've been working on gun safety, and we've been working on gun manufacturers. And we've been working, to pressure the federal government which is the largest purchaser of weapons, is the government. And we've been talking about smart guns, guns that are kind of coded, to fingerprint recognition. If the government would insist on that and only buy, then the gun manufacturers would have to adjust.
Wouldn't get into the wrong hands.
If it gets in the wrong hands, the gun won't work.
Yes.
This is just a common sense solution to gun violence.